Michael Jackson desperately wanted one role in the first X-Men movie, and in no universe would it have made sense. X-Men turns 25 years old this week, so here's some things I bet you never knew about it. The story of the X-Men starts in 1963 when Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created the characters at Marvel Comics. After their success with Fantastic Four, they were looking for another team, and Lee had grown tired of writing separate origin stories for every hero. So he thought, what if the heroes were just born with their powers? They're mutants. And then Kirby thought, well, if they're born with abilities, they need to learn how to use them, so they'd go to school. Lee wanted to call them the Mutants, but Marvel publisher Martin Goodman thought kids wouldn't know what that meant, so they came up with the catchier title X-Men because they have extra abilities, and also their professor is Charles Xavier, Professor X. The X-Men ran for 7 years, but were then cancelled in 1970 due to poor sales. They were later brought back in 1975 and quickly grew into the iconic integral part of Marvel that we know today. The prospect of an X-Men movie first came about in 1984 when Orion Pictures acquired the rights to the characters, but development fell apart when Orion faced financial issues. Then in 1989, Carolco Pictures kicked the tires on X-Men, with James Cameron producing and Catherine Bigelow directing. They considered Bob Hoskins for Wolverine and Angela Bassett for Storm, but the deal fell apart when Stan Lee started talking to Cameron about Spider-Man instead. Carolco then went bankrupt, and the X-Men rights reverted back to Marvel. But then in 1992, X-Men the Animated Series became a hit on the Fox Kids block, which caught the eye of 20th Century Fox, the movie studio. So producer Lauren Schuler Donner, wife of director Richard Donner, acquired the X-Men rights in 1994 and set it up at Fox. And then it went through 5 years of development hell, with a revolving door of writers and screenplay drafts. Andrew Kevin Walker wrote the first screenplay. His initial draft focused on Xavier recruiting Wolverine into the X-Men, their feud with Magneto, and Oliver Trask attacking the X-Men with Sentinels. Lita Kalogridis did a rewrite in 1995, and then Michael Chabon pitched a treatment until Ed Solomon was finally brought on to do a rewrite in August 1996. Meanwhile, Fox and Donner were looking for a director. They considered Brett Ratner, Robert Rodriguez, and Paul W.S. Anderson. The latter two declined, and so they went out to Usual Suspects director Bryan Singer. Singer was hesitant to take on a comic book movie, but producer Tom DeSanto convinced him to do it by discussing themes of prejudice in the story. Singer officially signed on to the X-Men in December 1996. And then John Logan and James Schamus did some rewrites, but by 1998, legendary X-Men comic book writer Chris Claremont was so frustrated, he sent Fox a 4-page-long memo explaining the X-Men's core concepts and their differences from other superheroes. Finally, later that year, Singer and DeSanto wrote a treatment that took the X-Men seriously. They thought of Xavier and Magneto like MLK and Malcolm X. They made Rogue an important character because she embodied alienation. The idea that Magneto would try to turn the world's leaders into mutants was inspired by Roman Emperor Constantine converting to Christianity, which ended the persecution of early Christians in the Roman Empire. This was even explained outright in a deleted scene from the film. Fox liked this pitch, but it needed Singer to make some cuts to lower the budget, so he took out Beast, Nightcrawler, and the Danger Room. Singer then enlisted his assistant David Hayter and the Usual Suspects writer Chris McQuarrie to help with the screenplay, working off Ed Solomon's last draft and Singer's new treatment. Hayter had an extensive knowledge of the X-Men comics, and he made sure things were comic accurate, like Wolverine being Canadian. At one point, they also brought in Joss Whedon to do a rewrite of the third act, but most of his changes were rejected. The final film only contains 2 bits of Whedon dialogue. At the end of the day, Hayter, Singer, and DeSanto have writing credits on the movie. McQuarrie and Solomon both asked not to have their names on the film because of all the script mayhem behind the scenes. And that decision likely cost each of them millions of dollars in residuals. Solomon later said that he regretted it. Now it was finally time to cast the movie. Singer's first choice for Wolverine was Russell Crowe, but he declined. Instead, he recommended his friend, fellow Aussie, Hugh Jackman. But Hugh Jackman was an unknown at the time, and he was deemed too tall for the part. Singer then met with Viggo Mortensen, but he didn't want to sign on for multiple films. Finally, Singer cast Dougray Scott as Wolverine. In 1999, Michael Jackson actively campaigned for the role of Professor X. He even met with Singer and Donner and delivered an elaborate presentation showing off his talents and how special effects could make him an old white man. But the studio and producers never actually took Michael Jackson's request seriously. Singer had his sights set on Patrick Stewart as early as 1997, and he wanted Ian McKellen as Magneto after working with him on Apt Pupil. McKellen had recently committed to The Lord of the Rings, so Singer shot McKellen scenes early in production so he could make both movies work. A number of famous actors rejected the film. Jim Caviezel was originally cast to play Cyclops, but he had to back out due to scheduling conflicts with Frequency. Janet Jackson was the first choice for Storm, but she declined due to tour obligations. Charlize Theron was offered and rejected Jean Grey, while Rachel Lee Cook turned down Rogue, a decision she would later come to regret. Anna Paquin dropped out of the movie Tart to be an X-Men. Stan Lee makes his first ever big screen cameo in the film. Hayter and DeSanto cameo as Ellis Island police officers, and George Buza, the voice of Beast from the animated series, appears as the truck driver who drops off Rogue at the bar. And associate producer Kevin Feige, who was working with Lauren Donner at the time, shot a cameo cameo as a Weapon X technician, but it was cut from the final movie. The filmmakers intentionally chose not to replicate the X-Men costumes from the comic books. The Matrix was a pretty big hit at the time, and it directly influenced the leather style in the film. Singer justified the black leather outfits as being more durable and protective. Oakley provided Cyclops' glasses, customizing their X-Metal Juliet design. The filmmakers originally wanted Wolverine's claws to be made of metal and be attached to the actor at all times under a full prosthetic sleeve. Designer Gordon Smith refused both of those requests, and instead he built hundreds of pairs of claws that were made of plaster and could easily be taken on and off. Fox set the budget at $75 million, and filming began on September 22, 1999 in Toronto and Hamilton, Ontario. They shot at Central Commerce Collegiate, in the Distillery District, and at the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum. Casa Loma, Roy Thompson Hall, and Metro Hall served as interiors for X Mansion, while Parkwood Estate in Oshawa was its exterior. Spencer Smith Park stood in for Liberty Island. 3 weeks into production, they experienced a casting crisis. Wolverine actor Doug Ray Scott had to drop out after suffering a motorbike accident and because of his scheduling conflicts with Mission Impossible 2. He'd later claimed that Tom Cruise actually made him drop out of X-Men as well. So the production revisited that Hugh Jackman guy after liking his many auditions. Bryan Singer's behavior on set was allegedly quite erratic and angry. In a 2020 Hollywood Reporter expose, one of the movie's producers called Singer a monster. And Singer even admitted at the time to being on medication for his back pain, while the Hollywood Reporter says people on set characterized his drug use as problematic, leading to late arrivals to the set, mood swings, and explosive tantrums. Singer would have actors like Rebecca Romijn sit for hours of makeup and then decide on a whim not to use them that day. The article also detailed accusations of Singer giving small roles to younger actors in exchange for sex. Donner then tapped Kevin Feige to be on set to monitor the situation. Singer also banned comic books on set, so Feige would sneak them to the actors to help them understand their roles. Speaking of Rebecca Romijn, she played Mystique in the film, and her makeup included 110 individual silicone prosthetics. At first, they were going to use cosmetic-grade food coloring to make her blue, but then Singer insisted that her skin look opaque like in the comics, and so that added 6 hours to Romijn's time in the makeup chair every day. She told Entertainment Weekly, "Making the movie was very difficult. I had almost no contact with the rest of the cast. It was like I was making a different film from everyone else. It was hell." Production wrapped on March 3rd, 2000. 7 different VFX companies were hired to do the CGI on the film. Digital Domain handled the shot where Bruce Davison turns into a liquid figure. Each frame of that shot took 39 hours to render. Singer initially wanted John Williams to score the film, but he declined due to scheduling conflicts. For marketing, the Fox network aired a special called Mutant Watch. Marvel released a tie-in prequel comic called X-Men Beginnings, and there was also the video game X-Men Mutant Academy released July 6, 2000, which featured costumes and other materials from the movie. The film held its premiere at Ellis Island on July 12, 2000, a significant location to the film, but also the themes behind X-Men. And then the film opened on 3,025 screens in North America on July 14, 2000. It grossed $57.5 million opening weekend, a record for a superhero movie up to that point, and then it would go on to gross $296 million total worldwide, nearly 4 times its budget, making it the 9th biggest movie of the year. Critics liked X-Men. Today, 82% of the 176 reviews assessed by Rotten Tomatoes are positive. The movie was a smash on home video, grossing $60 million its first weekend, and $114 million total in its first year. X-Men's success kickstarted its own franchise and breathed new life into the superhero genre, showing Hollywood just how viable comic book stories could be. It also gave Kevin Feige his first taste of superhero movie making, and we all know what that led to. Fox and later Disney would go on to make 14 X-Men movies total, and the actors and characters that debuted in X-Men 25 years ago are still popping up in Marvel movies today. Much of the original X-Men are set to appear in Avengers Doomsday in 2026, though many believe this will be their last go-around, and that Marvel will be rebooting the characters after Avengers Secret Wars in 2027. If you made it to the end of this video, tell me your favorite X-Men character in the comments. And thanks for watching. For more deep dives and entertainment news, subscribe to my newsletter.